Hello everyone. I've just started to feel better from my illness, and it was from when my antibiotics were literally quadrupled that I started to feel good again. I'm actually going to have some really in-depth blood tests to figure out why I'm ill so often, because to be honest, it's really getting on my nerves because it's very detrimental. Because if you can imagine, every time I start to get in a really good flow of doing my videos, I seem to get really badly ill for a week or so and I can't upload. But I'll actually put a picture up on screen now of all the tests that they're doing on me, so hopefully this should sort this out for me. I just thought I'd give people an update because I know I've said in a couple of my videos recently about being ill, and if I'm honest, I've probably not been consistently well for over 3 months now, so I just need to get this sorted. But yeah, there's just an update on myself. And I've just got well enough to start making videos again, and I think you're all really going to enjoy this video. I made sure I chose some really scary stories for this, so let's all sit back and we will begin. My grandfather was a Royal Canadian Air Force pilot during World War II. His plane was brought down a number of times during the war. One of those times he experienced something he could never explain. His plane was shot down in Germany. It was a hazy evening and hard to see a whole lot. There was a group earlier that had been bombing the area. He and another plane went down in the forest. The other pilot did not survive. My grandfather was trying to find somewhere that he could hide out while the German planes were still in the air. He then heard somebody crying. He understood that most casualties of war were innocent civilians, so he was trying to find out who was crying to see if he could help them. It was getting very dark out when he found a little girl with cuts on her face and covered in dirt and ash. He didn't speak German very well, but he knew enough to figure out what she was saying. He followed her through the trees for a while. He couldn't see very much because there was a lot of ash in the air. Everything smelt burnt and dead. He always said that's what everything smelt like during the war. Burnt, dead, sometimes mouldy. They then came out to what was left of a small farm in a forest. They were very near a small town, the one that had been bombed. A bomb hit the farm directly and everything was broken and collapsing. The girl then led him to the front door, which was half broken off, and they went inside. As he went inside, he couldn't find the little girl anymore. She was gone. He was very afraid because he had literally nowhere to go. It was the middle of night, so he had to stay hidden in the house until morning. In the morning, he then discovered that there were several bodies around the farm. There was a man, a woman, and 3 young girls. One of the girls looked exactly like the one who'd led him into the house. She had been crushed by a piece of wall. He buried the bodies and then went back to his plane to see if he could radio for help. I was only around 12 years old when this happened. Me, my mum, along with my brother went to our local cemetery to say some prayers for the dead. We're Catholic. Now, I'm not sure why we did this, but I think it was because our family friend had just died and got buried there. We prayed here for about 30 minutes and then decided to leave. My mum got in the truck with me and my brother was about to get in the passenger side, which is also at the side facing the graveyards. Right as my mum got in and shut the door, a random, unusually strong gust of wind started blowing in the direction of the graveyard. We then all suddenly heard the most horrific, disembodied scream that any of us have ever heard in our lives. I vividly remember it sounded like it was an older woman who was maybe in her 40s or 50s, I guess. After I looked over at my brother, he looked straight back at me with the same pale expression on my face. After that, we all jumped into the truck and frantically told our mum what had just happened, and she just responded saying, yeah, okay. I know without doubt it was a paranormal experience that happened to me because there were no houses around the cemetery and there was no way that anybody's voice could have been carried that far. I mean, literally, nobody was there. It wasn't just the fact that nobody was around though, it's the fact that you could hear it projected at us and it was so close to us, yet nobody was there. My brother and I still talk about it to this day 10 years later. And this was literally the most screwed up scream that I've ever heard in my life. If I had to say, it would almost sound demonic. This is a true story that happened to my father about 13 years ago. That day, my dad was so excited to be taking a shop class at a community college. The catch was that he had to travel over a mountain to attend it. He asked to borrow my sister's car so that way he could attend the seminar for the weekend. He headed off early that winter morning, full of joy, excited for what was ahead. Unfortunately, at 10 AM, I got a call saying that my father was being rushed to hospital. He was in critical condition and was rushed into emergency surgery. A part of his bone was coming out of his leg. He had collapsed lungs and other major injuries. It was touch and go for 4 weeks while he was trying to heal. During this time, we had the car towed to the local car impound yard. I went with my mother to clear out the car and met the insurance adjuster. As we began clearing out the car, I realised that the back window was completely shattered and the front driver's seatbelt appeared to be cut. It was almost as if somebody had come along and cut the seatbelt and whatnot where the driver sat. I made sure that I double checked to see if there was any frayed edges, but there were none. I knew my sister at that time never kept a seatbelt cutter, and I couldn't find any scissors in the car. Now the hospital told us that the emergency crew had found my father laying in the snow, which had sent him into hypothermia, and this had probably saved his life from internal bleeding. It appeared that my father had a stroke. He either had the stroke which caused him to go off the cliff or he'd fallen asleep at the wheel because of it. They say if he had not flown out of the back window, his injuries could have been twice as bad and he would probably be dead on impact. We got a copy of the police report of the incident. The report states that a man had flagged down a passing car for help. The driver in the vehicle saw the man and saw the tyres tracks going over the edge of the cliff. He decided to stop and see what was wrong and see if he could assist the man with anything. He followed this man and looked down the cliff and found my father laying in a pool of blood. The car had been rolled and stopped by a boulder 250 feet down. If it hadn't stopped him, he would have went another 250 feet down into the river. Now my father had flown out of the back window during the accident and landed in the snow. The man who had been flagged down offered to stay to help my dad, while the other guy ran down to get the mountain rescue team for help. When the emergency crew got there, he was still staying with my father and showed them where my father was. They immediately attended my father. Then, thinking the man was a part of the accident, they went to find him to treat him as well, but he was nowhere to be found. They looked all around and said the only footprints they could see were the ones of the emergency personnel that they made down the cliffside. They all gave a description of the man that was staying with my father in the report. The description was very odd to me. Months later, my father was finally able to come home into home care. I decided to ask my father if he remembered the accident. He said that he remembers most of it, but not the hospital. I asked him if he had cut the seatbelt with whatever he had around him. He said that he never cut the seatbelt but had flown out of the window during the accident. He said he tried to call for help but had no service. My father then told me that he also said his best friend, and who was also his uncle, was with him through the entire accident, from just before he went off the cliff until we saw emergency personnel. He sat with him, comforting him as he went in and out of consciousness. The description on the police report also matches my great uncle's description. I remember growing up spending many days at his family house during the summers. My father and uncle were very close. Farrell unfortunately passed away a year earlier from the time of my father's accident of brain cancer. My father was devastated when it happened. Now, not only did seeing his old friend at the accident help him survive, but it also helped my father get over the loss of his best friend. Ever since my grandpa died, which was back in 2004, the same type of bird has often been following us into places where we like to go or lived. Now, I'm no bird expert, but it's always pretty small and it has an orange breast. When it appears, it just looks curiously like it's just observing. It would actually get quite close to us and never even seem scared. But it would never eat anything that we left for it. A lot of the time that we would see it, it would be in his grave in the cemetery. But not always. Sometimes it comes after rethinking memories of my grandpa. I mean, like even yesterday, me, my mum and grandma were walking through the forest and picking up some berries and mushrooms like we normally do. Suddenly, This bird was next to us. It observed us for a moment, then simply flew away. My mum then told me that going through the forest and picking berries was one of my grandpa's favourite things to do. I used to live in a house that backs up to a big open space where there are lots of hiking trails. Lots of joggers and people walk their dogs there. Anyway, one night I had a kind of creepy dream that there was an old lady that come into my room and she kept on trying to get me to go outside with her. The dream woke me up, so I gone and got some water from the tap and turned off my fan because it was really cold when I fell asleep again. I then went right back into the same dream with the same old lady trying to come into my room and saying, "You have to go outside now." I kept telling her that it was too cold. I woke up again. This time, my fan was on. I figured I must have just turned it on or accidentally flipped the switch as I got up, so I turned the fan off and went back to sleep. This time, I had the exact same dream again, except she was much older looking in this one and really agitated. She was yelling at me, "Go outside, you must go outside." I got up in the dream and followed her to the hallway. When I got to the hallway, she wasn't there and I woke up and I was actually standing in the middle of the hallway. I have never walked around in my sleep before or after this. Also, my fan was on again when I come back to my room. At this point, I was freaked out, so I gone and got something to eat and watched TV. I went back to bed at around 5 or 6 and the dream never came back. The really messed up part to all of this is that, a couple of days later, I saw that there were police cars in the open space, and when I asked my mum what was happening, she said that they found an older woman who was reported missing days ago, and she must have had a heart attack or stroke or something by the trail and actually died there. This took place in 2008 in northern Ohio. My cousins invite me out to go on a camping trip to some hidden state park or whatever. I just happily agreed because hey, Ohio has to be the best part of Indiana, right? I then drive over to the houses and we pack our tent and get some food and headed out in his truck for a few hours. After miles of twists and turns in the road, it finally gets really bumpy enough to wake me up, and we're suddenly off the grid like a dirt road track, if that makes sense. We then park off our truck and head into the hills for a couple of miles. We make our base camp at the top of a hill overlooking a valley with thick trees and whatnot on either side of us. Eventually at nightfall at around 1 AM, we head towards a fire. As we're sat there, I ask what the park's called, and they all just laugh at me. No, this isn't a park, it's native land that we're camping upon, and this is a sacred hill. I thought they were lying, but they name a tribe which sounded like it was pretty legit and I couldn't really argue against them. A few minutes later, we hear this screamy howl that just kind of drifts across the hills and right towards where we are. We all grew up hunting and we've been around the country and have had a fair share of animal encounters and howls, and none of us knew what this was. If anything, I would say a screaming fox, but it was too deep for that. Maybe like a wolf would carry, I don't know. We were still laughing at it and to be honest found it really funny, but eventually when it continued and it was obviously getting closer to us, we started to get very uneasy. The fifth scream sounded like it was coming from down the valley, so we all looked over into the direction, and I don't care if you believe this or not, but I say this is true to my death. Out of the tree line, I saw what looked like a gnarly thin naked man who was far away, and he seemed way too tall to be normal. He was somewhat transparent. This thing takes off in a sprint with both its legs coming directly towards us with no hesitation. All three of us ran out of the hill and into the woods towards the car. Being nigh at it only made it more terrifying. As we reach the bottom of the hill, we hear the screaming again. This time it is where our camp is. None of us turn back to even check if the thing's near us. After the fastest 2-mile hike in my life, we finally get to the truck and floor it off the land to the nearest McDonald's, where we all sat down with no words together. We agreed to go back in the morning to grab our things. We do, and to our surprise, nothing has been moved and nothing seems out of the ordinary. We expected the place to be trashed, or at least a few things to be taken. We then drove to my uncle's and we tried to joke about it and move on, but This has bothered me till this very day. I don't think it's something that I'm ever gonna forget. I just remember this today. About a year ago, when my mum and I were driving around, we approached a red light and the car in front of us started slowing down totally normally. This car had actually been in front of us for about 10 minutes. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary until the light turned green and the car didn't move. We waited here about a minute before my mum decided to beep at him to try and get this guy to move. But he still didn't move. There was no response. Now we couldn't see the back of their head, so we figured they'd just dropped something. The light turned red again, and at this point my mum beeped again out of annoyance, which probably isn't the best thing to do. A pedestrian starts walking across and had seen the whole thing. He decides to knock on the car window to make sure the person inside is okay. My mum and I watch as there's no response. He looks in the car, then looks at us with a really confused expression. He starts shaking his head while looking at us again. He does the same thing twice. I lower my window and ask if the person is okay. He then replies with, "There's nobody inside." Way back when my mother was only a baby and my uncle was 4 years old, my grandmother invites some friends round while their husbands went out to drink at the pub. They had a nice house in the mountains, so it wasn't often that people ventured up there unless it was their intention to visit. After the men had left, the woman decided to do a Ouija board. My grandmother had already put my mother to sleep, and as the only other person in the house was my uncle who was playing in the kitchen with them, they all put their finger on the playset and asked the generic questions. Is anyone with us, etc. After a few minutes of trying to get it to move, it eventually went to yes. My grandmother was a little uncomfortable with this, but they carried on anyway. They decided to ask how the person had died. The Ouija board spelled out "cannot tell you." They asked who it was and it said the same again. This confused them. My grandmother asked why not, and it wouldn't tell them anything. The only answers that they can really get are weird ones like, "There are too many ears." My grandmother tells me that this surprised them and that they weren't sure if they wanted to carry on. That's when the thing began to move again, and it tells them, "Send the boy out of the room." Now this is my uncle. My grandmother is ashamed that she actually sent him into a different room. The board then starts spelling something else but suddenly stops and spells out, "Somebody is coming." And they hurriedly said goodbye. It turns out that my grandfather had forgotten his wallet and driven back to the house. My grandmother looks back on this and tells me how that she's glad they were interrupted. She tells me she hates to think what could have possibly happened to my uncle had he have actually been left there alone and the session hadn't stopped. This happened about a month ago. I was in my room when I heard this loud crash coming from the doorway of my home. I went out there to see what was going on, and I could see that an angel sculpture had fallen onto the ground. The thing is that this sculpture's string was placed on a metal hook. The only way for it to be taken down is by somebody pulling on the string and holding it up over the hook. There's no way that it would just fall down. The string hadn't broken either. I decided that I was going to take some pictures of this, and as I opened up my iPhone, I saw that my storage space was 6.66. Now, I know this could all have been some weird coincidence, but it still doesn't explain how the angel fell, and why was it the angel of all the sculptures that fallen? About 20 years ago, my great-grandmother passed when I was in my early teens. We didn't live in the same state as her, so unfortunately we missed her funeral, but we were able to drive 2,000 miles to visit the rest of the family a couple of weeks later. Now I'm from a Catholic family, so it was no surprise that she had the typical religious candles and statues of many saints. Among the things, there was a blonde doll in a blue dress in a giant glass cabinet. We were told by my aunt that the doll would grow hair, and apparently they regularly took care of it, bathing it, washing its clothes and trimming its hair. They also were convinced that there was a spirit living inside it. Coincidentally, my mum was familiar with that doll and tried to convince me that the doll's hair had grown. I wasn't buying it. I paid close attention to the length of its hair, because my family refused to let me take pictures. Now the hair flowed a little past the shoulders, nothing spectacular, it just looked like a regular doll. A couple of years later, my grandmother wanted to revisit our out-of-state family members, so what was the first thing I wanted to do? Yeah, go and check on the doll. Now its hair had grown outwards towards the entire length of the doll. I talked with my family and they said the doll was grey-stricken due to the passing of my great-grandmother, and that they actually saw some tears down her face the next couple of days. They explained that they had stopped cutting the hair because apparently that was my great-grandmother's thing. I hadn't seen the rest of my family since, but we hear from them once in a while, and the doll is still with them, and amazingly, the hair is still growing and everything. I never got a real explanation as to why this was happening, just that there was a spirit inside the doll. I was staying with a friend in a remote house in Scotland. It was midnight and I woke up to go to the toilet, and suddenly it was very, very cold, and I heard somebody complain, "They always make this room so filthy, always. I'm always cleaning this, it's so dirty all the time, I can't stand it." It was freezing cold while I was hearing this, and suddenly, as soon as the talking stopped, it became warm again. The next morning, I told the house owner what happened last night and how it was suddenly very cold, and I couldn't finish my sentence before he said, "Who have you seen?" Now that part where he said who sent shivers down my spine. What do you mean who? He later told me his daughter and son-in-law lived in that very room, and the son-in-law had died in an accident and he loved to keep the room spotless. I was a complete skeptic before this incident. My wife and I rented a secluded small 2-bedroom cabin in the Washington area so that way we could have a hiking adventure. Upon arriving, my wife walked into the house and said that there was no way she was sleeping in one of the rooms because of the energy. To her defense, it was a bit creepy. There was a weird doll dress that was on the walls as decoration. There was a weird rocking chair that seemed to move on its own, and there was also some door that seemed to lead into an attic. Once we got settled, we discovered a journal with entries from past guests. There were multiple terrifying entries. My husband woke up to the smell of bacon and eggs cooking, yet nobody was awake. I wouldn't mind that, to be honest. The doll dress in the bedroom is the gateway to hell. We woke up last night to the sound of something walking in the attic, yet the door was locked, and when we come to find it the following morning, it was open. I didn't think any of this was real, but we decided to sleep in the living room now. So the next night, after hiking all day, we were eating and drinking outside at night by the fire. We were drinking some alcohol and I started to dare my wife to go into the bedroom that she was scared about. She was freaked out, but I insisted there was nothing wrong with the house, and I proceeded to go inside and take the challenge myself by exploring the room at night. As I entered the hallway, I reached the door and turned the doorknob and pushed the handle inwards to enter the room. Now the door opened about 10 inches and stopped as it hit a chair that was propped up against the door. My mind quickly calculated the logics of why this had happened. Door opens inward, room with only one entrance, chairs at the side of the door keeping me from going in. I then let out my scream and slammed the door shut after I realised what was happening and played it off to my wife that I was trying to scare her. So it's about 5:30 AM. I went to bed about 15 minutes prior. I'm still not fully asleep. I can still hear CNN in the background on my TV. Then, I see a huge black force sprinting towards me from about 10 meters away. Instantly, I screamed so loud and ran out of my room. I was so scared I didn't really have any time to think. Imagine just laying there with your eyes closed, suddenly feeling like somebody's watching you, opening them, and somebody's running at you silently like they're on their tiptoes. Now the thing is, I haven't seen that thing since. I know whatever it was, it just felt really evil. I know that if I'd stayed there any longer, I would have been in great danger. And that's not the worst thing. This happened again. A friend of mine, Jen, is a semi-retired geriatrics nurse with a Masters of Science in Nursing. She is in her mid-60s and has experienced numerous unexplainable events in her career, and I have one story to share. Jan was a head nurse during one stage of her life at a nursing home where one of her male patients was in the process of dying. He had an abundance of family members visiting him near the end, and Jan would occasionally drop in to speak with the family and try and assure them on his condition. During one visit to his room, Jan was standing around talking with his relatives when the patient sat up in the bed and exclaimed, "Dorothy, what are you doing here?" while staring directly at an empty corner of the room. Lots of the family members there were very emotional by this, and they started crying. Some of them were just dumbfounded though. Jan asked why the reactions. One of the patient's family members then stated that Dorothy was a patient's sister. She passed away within the last 24 hours, and they didn't want to upset him by telling him that his sister had died. Even reciting this story now still sends shivers up my spine. The following took place 5 years ago, when me and some friends got bored one night and decided to go and explore a church. Now this church was supposedly haunted, but that was nothing compared to what was meant to happen in the graveyard. Apparently if you stood there at certain nights, you would hear voices that seemed to swirl around you, and you would have the immediate urge to leave. Me and my friends couldn't pass up on how interesting this could be for us, so we all decided to go there one wintry night. If I'm completely honest, I was really skeptical going there. I knew this place would be creepy and your mind would play tricks on you, but nothing was actually going to happen. Definitely not the swirling sounds. So anyway, as we get there, like I thought, nothing really happened. I got bored and my friends actually started trying to provoke ghosts. They did this for some time, but nothing really seemed to happen, so we decided to go back to the car. Just as we did so, this intense sudden storm really picked up. That was a little scary, to be honest. I mean, the others were laughing about it with me, but I think if we're true to ourselves, it did creep us out, because the weather was pretty calm up until then, and I didn't see any clouds until that point in the dark night sky. So we all make our way back to the car laughing and joking around about what we had heard. Nothing. Just as we're doing so, we hear this really loud crash sound like somebody smashed a piece of glass. We then turn around and see that all of the statues of angels have suddenly tipped over. I mean literally every single one. There was like 20 statues which we could see. 8 of them were angels and every single one was on its side now. I really wish I could tell you more about this story or a follow-up, but honestly, I have no idea what happened that night. None of us do. We all got out of there and we've never discussed it since. Thank you for watching everyone. Now like I said, I'm starting to get well again, so that means I can finally finish my 2 subscriber special videos and start working on my next one. And I have some very special guest narrators on that and I'm sure you're gonna love them. So you have that to look forward to. If you'd like to see me work with any featured narrator, then please leave it in the comments below so I can get to work with them. I hope you're all having a great day and take care. Goodbye everyone.